Paris, 1656. While the salons of the rich glowed with candlelight and laughter, another world existed just beyond the cobbled streets. A world hidden behind the iron gates of the General Hospital of Paris. It wasn't a hospital in the modern sense. There were no doctors, no healing, no hope. King Louis XIV had ordered its creation, not to treat the sick, but to remove the poor, the homeless, the undesirables from sight. They were rounded up by force, men, women, children, accused of nothing more than poverty, locked away in sprawling buildings where time stood still and the air reeked of filth and despair. Those inside weren't patients. They were inmates. Food was scarce, disease spread like wildfire, and punishments for disobedience were brutal. Beatings, solitary confinement, even chains. There are reports of people buried alive in mass graves. Others simply disappeared, never seen again. By 1700, tens of thousands had passed through its doors. Most never left. The General Hospital of Paris became a graveyard with walls. Not because of plagues or war, but because society decided that poverty was a crime. And in Paris, the city of lights, the poor were left to rot in the dark. In the narrow alleys of 18th century London, there lived a respected midwife named Elizabeth Brownrigg. She was on paper a woman of good repute, employed by the Foundling Hospital to take in orphaned girls as apprentices. The city, blind to what happened behind closed doors, believed her home to be a place of learning and care. They were wrong. Behind the bolted doors of her modest house, Elizabeth ruled with iron cruelty. The girls she trained became victims of unrelenting abuse. They were starved, beaten, whipped with horsewhips until their skin tore open, forced to sleep naked on bare floorboards, forbidden to cry under threat of worse punishment if they dared. She was methodical, controlled, almost surgical in her violence. Her favored victim was a girl named Mary Clifford, barely 14 years old. Mary's body bore the brunt of Elizabeth's rage. Neighbors sometimes heard muffled screams, but fear or apathy kept them silent. And Mary, weakened by starvation, could no longer cry for help, until one day she was found. Mary had managed to crawl out of the house and collapse in the street. Her back was a mass of open wounds and bruises. Infection had set in. Within days, she died in agony. The autopsy stunned London. Her body was a map of systematic torture. Public outrage exploded. Elizabeth was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. On the day of her hanging in 1767, the crowd gathered in thousands. They weren't there out of curiosity. They came for justice. And when the noose tightened, they cheered. A midwife sworn to bring life became a name spoken in horror. And Mary Clifford's story? It still haunts the shadowed corners of London's past. (203 AD, Carthage, a Roman province where faith cost you your life. Perpetua was only 22, a noble woman, a new mother, and a Christian, in a time when that alone was a death sentence. She and 4 others were arrested, accused not of murder or treason, but of believing in something Rome could not tolerate. Her father begged her to recant. He clutched her infant, pleaded with her, through tears, but she refused, quietly, firmly. Thrown into a dark, crowded cell, Perpetua kept a diary, the only surviving first-person account of martyrdom from that era. She wrote of dreams, visions, and unshakable calm, even as the guards dragged her to the amphitheater. Felicity, her servant, was 8 months pregnant when she was arrested. She gave birth in prison, only to be led to execution days later, still bleeding. On the day of their deaths, Perpetua and Felicity were dressed not in rags, but in fine robes, a final humiliation designed to mock them. Then they were forced into the arena. A wild heifer was released. It gored Felicity and threw Perpetua to the ground. Bloodied and bruised, she stood up and helped her friend to her feet. The crowd fell silent. But Rome wasn't done. Gladiators stepped forward. Perpetua guided the sword to her own throat when the young executioner's hands trembled too much to strike. This wasn't just an execution. It was a message. Defy Rome and suffer like them. But her words, smuggled from prison and passed through generations, remain. Centuries later, the empire is gone. Her story is not. '90 BC, Rome, a city at the height of its power, and at the mercy of its own traditions. Cornelia was a Vestal virgin, one of 6 sacred priestesses tasked with tending the eternal flame of Vesta. Chosen as a child, she was sworn to chastity for 30 years in exchange for prestige, privilege, and divine favor. But in Rome, even divine favor could be revoked. Rumors began to spread. A whisper here, a sidelong glance there, that Cornelia had broken her vow, that a man had been seen leaving her chambers. There is no evidence, no witness, only suspicion. But in matters of state religion, suspicion was enough. The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, sentenced her to the only punishment allowed by law: burial alive. For a Vestal could not be publicly executed. She was too sacred. So the Senate prepared a chamber beneath the earth. A small room, a couch, a lamp, a little food and water, for the illusion of mercy. Then Cornelia was led through the forum, veiled, silent, flanked by guards and priests. The people watched, but none dared speak. She was lowered into the pit. The stone slab was sealed above her, and Rome moved on. Her crime was never proven. Her name barely whispered, but the silence beneath the city lingered, like smoke from a sacred fire that had long since gone out. Kansas, 1870s. A lonely stretch of prairie, scattered with small farms and travelers heading west. Among them, the Bender family, John and Elvira Bender, immigrants with heavy accents. Their adult children, John Jr. and Kate, strikingly polite, even charming. Together, they ran a small grocery shop and an inn for passing travelers. At first, they seemed like any other settler family. But then, people began to disappear. A farmer heading to Independence, a merchant carrying a heavy bag of coins, a young girl and her brother never reaching their destination. The neighbors grew uneasy. Rumors spread. Had they been attacked by bandits? Had they vanished into the wild frontier? Or was something darker at work? In 1873, a group of locals gathered. They rode to the Bender homestead, but found it deserted. The house was eerily quiet. Inside, they discovered a trap door, leading down into a blood-soaked cellar. Outside, behind the house, they began to dig, and there, they uncovered the bodies. Dozens of travelers had been murdered, their skulls bashed in, their throats cut, their valuables stolen. The Benders had perfected a routine. They invited a guest to dinner, seated him at the head of the table, his back against a canvas curtain. While Kate distracted the guest with conversation, John or his father would stand behind the curtain and deliver a fatal blow to the skull. The victims were then stripped, buried in the orchard, and the Benders calmly went back to business until the next traveler arrived. When the truth came out, the entire frontier was shocked. A family of serial killers, hiding in plain sight. But by the time the townspeople arrived, the Benders were long gone. They vanished, some say on horseback, some say by train, and were never captured. For years, bounty hunters and lawmen searched. Sightings were reported across the country. But the Bender family slipped into legend, their crimes haunting the prairies like a shadow. That never lifted.